Welcome back to Southern Iowa. We are going to be doing one of your guys' favorite style video. We're going to bust out the whiteboard today, and we're going to look at what the grain bin did financially in 2025. We're going to see if it paid for itself, if it even made me some money. But Jake's here with my whiteboard holder. The old whiteboard's seen better days, but so has the farm economy, so it's fitting. So you guys know what is coming up today in our grain bin field trip lesson plan. Did a grain bin pay? We're also going to be talking about the cost to hold grain. So the cost to carry, I'm not really sure what the term is that they say that, but basically we're going to be looking to figure out how much money and interest the grain is costing you when you carry it in there, in terms of if you are paying interest on money or the interest that you could be gathering yourself. So we're going to be looking at the cost of carry. We're also going to then revisit the harvest credit when it comes to paying for a grain bin. We had that whole video up there. We kind of tried to figure out what the harvest credit is. We'll be looking at that math again. And then at the very end of it, this one's a bonus, and something that I've personally wanted to know is what does test weight do to storage? We have an 18,000 bushel bin or 18,500 bushel bin that we are going to be looking at today. We are down to maybe a truckload and a half or so. So by the end of it, I will be able at the very end of the video to say, okay, 18,000 bushel grain bin, this test weight in this grain bin has been really pretty good, probably averaging 59.5 to 59.8 pounds test weight. So that's pretty good test weight. We'll figure out how many more bushels that put into that grain bin. So dive into the lesson plan with us. Hang in there. Let me know what you guys think of the numbers. I really appreciate it. Any math that you guys do or use to help, if you don't want to put it in the comment section, send me an email. I'll look at it. Everything is time stamped in the bottom for these categories if you guys want to jump to a certain section or something like that, or jump back and forth. But we're going to look at my math of cost of owning a grain bin, because remember, as a young farmer, I do believe two things are really, really important to you: tiling your ground and building grain bins. I've done a video on the wet bin over there every year since I've built it. This bin right here behind me also has beans in it right now, but we can do a video on it later on. But it hasn't made it through a year in the life. So we're going to be talking about the wet bin over here. That is an 18,500 bushel bin. A little bit of a recap. I built that bin in 2022. I paid $82,000 for the project. That included the bin constructed. It included my bringing in my 3-phase power. And then also it included the electric. So with that, there's some extra expenses with that bin that I incurred to get 3-phase in here. Because of that, and I've also said it in all my other videos, I don't include my electric charge into my figures here. You guys can include your electric charge. Mine's not that easy to figure out between the 3-phase power, and I have multiple other things on my account. And now there's also a bin here. So figuring out the electrical is a little bit of a challenge. There is expense with that. Do what you want with it. I'm leaving that out to try and keep numbers somewhat simple for you guys to follow with me. With that, I did not have cash to pay for that bin. Took a note out on that bin completely, so I financed the full $82,000 minus maybe some rock or something like that I paid for. So I have a 10-year note on that bin. You can do the math to 2022, so we've got a few years paid on it. So basically, the 10-year note, my payment on the bin is close to $10,800 per year, which makes, when the bin is completely full, now if it was half full or whatever, it will be different than that. But basically that makes my payment per bushel on that bin every year 58 cents. Now you can nitpick some more stuff, like how much does it cost to have the insurance on that bin, all these other things. Figure out your own numbers and plug them in there if you really want to get that close on this. I'm just trying to get a really good idea on what it costs or the financials look like on these grain bins. So we're going to be headed into harvest here. Let's now figure out what the price of grain did over the year. We also got to set the price of what we're going to say the grain was worth when it went into the bin. If you're in early September harvester, we'll put that in there as a number, but we're going to use October. September in 2024 was $3.90. Took a little bit of a dive when grain started coming in there in October. So corn went to $3.71. This is the number that we're going to use as the value of the grain that went into that grain bin, $3.71. After harvest started wrapping up, kind of in the end, we saw a rally. We saw an end of harvest rally into the end of 24 into the early 25. So November corn went to $4.14. How I am getting these numbers, you guys are going to want to know about that. Cargill and Eddyville is probably one of the places that we're going to use their numbers. I don't have the average of these. I'm just taking basically the middle of the month, 14, 15, 16s, what their bids were, and putting that up there. So 414 it was our November price corn. December, we continue to see a rally at 430. That's not bad. You know, we gained basically in between 30 to 60 cents in a short period of time. You gotta like that. It went the right way. Maybe the USDA came out with some numbers that were more reasonable, unlike the ones they just came out with the other day. So now we enter 2025, and I'm gonna use a blue Sharpie so that you guys can kind of follow along with that. So we enter 2025 and things continue to look better. Corn goes to 453. That's a really horrible 3, but we're gonna let it ride. Corn gets really nice in February, 470. 475. Corn did some good things there in February. March, corn takes a pretty significant dip in March. Maybe planting conditions were starting to look better, getting fields ready to go. Corn dips down to 449. April comes around. Something happens in April. Maybe, I don't know what happens, but April, corn rocket ships up to 477. The high comes in basically in April there at 447. Or 477. May, she craps out in May. So May, we take a big hit. We're down to 438. Man at 429, continue the trend down. July, we come in and trend down even harder. We lose another basically shy of 25, 30 cents. July, we're at 403. Things aren't looking so good. August, we've got a 380. That's not nice. And for the people that might want to see what September, if you still had grain in September, not a great idea. But anyways, it was hung out there kind of like it found a bottom at 383. I'll overlay some more like tables of things. So if you guys want to take a screenshot and or whatever reason to kind of keep the numbers a little more clean than reading my handwriting. So we're gonna go through and put the change in here. Basically what I'm trying to figure out, whatever it is over what or under what the grain is in there. So that was the change in there. So nowhere in there did we drop below the harvest price, which is good, but things get a little bit tight. Remember the bin cost was 58 cents. And now I have to have 2 different colored markers here so you guys can kind of follow along. I wish I had a green. I wonder if I had a green. Did I have a green? Ah, I did have a green. So magic of stuff. All right, I'm gonna put these numbers on here and look at this. Field trips are getting better. I got different colored markers here to kind of bring things out for you. So red is basically in that month. If you would have sold there, what your payment would have been or how much the grain bin affected you financially. So our first 3 months they're in red. That means that we lost 39 cents, 58 cents, 15 cents for going into the grain bin. As soon as we hit December, our grain bin starts paying for itself. You pocket a cent. January 24 cents, February 46 cents, March 20 cents. In April is 48 cents. May 9 cents. In June you're back to even with 0. Wind effects with the whiteboard here swinging. You're into July, you're back down 26 cents. You're back down 49 cents and down 46 cents. So there was an opportunity in here to basically walk away right there with money in your pocket or the grain bin paying for itself when you put grain in there. So the next thing that we're going to look at, the cost to carry, which means I'm going to have to erase this whiteboard and show you guys how to do that. All right, cost of carrying the corn or holding on to the corn. There is a formula if you want it. So you can plug your own numbers into it. What you need to know is the cost of the corn. I'm going to do the cost of the corn on average for the last year, or for 2025, and that was $4.2575. It's really fun when you got to get out to hundreds and thousands of a cent in grain. Then you need to know your interest rate. For this example, I'm using 8%. Interest rates were high, so whatever your interest rate was, put it in there. 8% interest on your cost of carry. Here's another one that you guys, if you're maybe consider buying or building or renting a grain bin or whatever you're deciding to do, is you got to think about your storage cost. Kind of commercial storage cost. So if you take it to the elevator and you store it in the elevator versus owning your storage, is a question mark. For me, that's zero, since I'm owning the asset type of thing. But if you wanted to kind of figure this out math-wise for grain that you're putting into commercial storage or something like that, I think that's around 5 cents a month. So you might want to put 5 cents in there or whatever, but I think that number is right around 5 cents. And then your last figure is time. How long do you hold it in terms of months? Essentially, when you plug all those numbers into this equation, for me, in 2025, the cost to carry was 0.028 of a dollar, so 2 cents, almost 3 cents per month. So that is how you can figure out your cost to carry of the opportunity lost of the grain in the grain bin versus money in your pocket. So figure out your cost to carry. Not hard to do. So pretty much when it goes into the grain bin there, you have no money into it. Then you just compound the cost over the months. So basically we're going from 3 cents all the way to 30 cents over the 10 months if you were to carry that grain in there. So that's your cost to carry of the interest that you're losing or paying on the money. So even if you are paying farming without any money, you could be making money on the grain that's in there. So you could figure it out the other way too, what it's costing you to keep that in corn. It narrows down a little bit. So we go from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 areas that pay. We're down to 1, 2, 3, 4 areas that pay. So that narrows it down. Doesn't look very good, but still, when you're looking at when you're going to be hauling grain, into February, into December, kind of up to there, it paid in that window to have it in old crop, your grain and bin, and sell it. So we're going to erase this because there's another thing that we did in last year's video when the commodity prices tanked. We tried to figure out what kind of credit we could give ourselves in a down market by being more efficient harvesting grain and putting it into the grain bin. So let's put that math up here real quick and rearrange things. Pretty much what we looked at now is the payment plus the cost to carry of the grain. So with that, we've got the same numbers that were on this side. Green, you're positive. Red, you're not. We also talked in that last video, like I just said, is about the harvest credit. We went through all the things from the trucking, the things you can get done in a day. All of those deals is that we are looking for essentially giving ourselves a 25 cents credit. Now that cost counts with the grain going into the grain bin, as in augering it and all that stuff. But we're giving ourselves basically a 25 cent head start because we can get more done in a day efficiently, get the basis in the trucking from local to not local. Just go watch that if you're wanting to know how we came up with that 25 cents. If you think that you have a really good number for that, send me an email. There's an email in my link in the description. Send me how you figure out how much you think you save by going to a grain bin in terms of time, labor, equipment, fuel, by being more efficient with your combine. I'd really like to know what your guys' numbers are, but throw them in there. Let me just write these down so that I can write a little cleaner for you.
262.
Yep.
0.52.
So with that, if you're looking at it, essentially, as soon as you got the grain bin out, and if you swept your grain bin by the 4th of July, the grain bin paid for itself. If you believe in that harvest credit, it paid for itself. Made, heck, almost 60 cents a bushel there on 18,500 bushels. Now there's a couple more things that we need to talk about here about why grain bins could have paid or would have paid. Like I said, paid $82,000 for the grain bin set up here. My payment this year is a little bit different. It's $10,707, which that's the payment. a certain percentage of that is not really an expense because I'm paying for an asset. Now the asset will depreciate, which is also a benefit of the grain bin, because however you decide to depreciate your grain bin, you can use that for a tax advantage of depreciating this asset. So I'm paying for an asset to make me money on a part of that payment. So it's not necessarily a true expense with that. One of the true expenses though is the interest on that grain. So you could remath this whole different way if you want to just say the interest on the grain, but that is an expense when it comes tax season, is interest on that grain bin every year, or this next payment is, or this last payment is $3,510. So that does come off of there. So with those numbers, this is the payment. I'm paying for an asset with it. I'm depreciating the asset on my taxes. And then also you get to write off the interest on it. So there is the other advantage that way. The other unforeseen tax advantage is that you can choose when to sell your grain. Now you could also do that if you're doing commercial storage and stuff. So I'll write that one off as a little bit of a less, you know, tax advantage, but you can control when you're bringing and selling grain to limit your tax liability by using a grain bin, because you don't have to pay taxes on the grain until you sell the grain. So that is another advantage of the grain bin, but the grain bin did pay this year, which is good because I like it when I can spend money and that money pays for that money, if that makes sense, where I don't have to supplement it. The grain bin paid for itself this last year. Another thing that we're gonna figure out here in the next couple of days is a little bit of a bonus, is that is an 18,000 bushel grain bin and 18,500 bushel grain bin. And since we are gonna be sweeping it out here and getting all the corn delivered out of it, and the thing was packed full this year, packed full. And it was some really pretty heavy test weight. I'll list out all my loads in one of those symbols. One of the discussions is, why does test weight matter? That's an 18,000 bushel grain bin. How many bushels at a heavier test weight actually fit into that grain bin? How would that affect the math that we just went over? That's a question. Yeah, we'll go sweep the grain bin and give you that number here at the end of it. So thank you guys for hanging out, and hopefully you enjoyed the whiteboard.
Professor Bin.
So the trucking showed that we hauled 18,262 bushels. The average weight or average moisture was 13.23%, and the average test weight was 59.67. What that means with the test weight is that, you know, a bushel is a standardized volume, and for corn it weighs 56 pounds. So since this corn was heavier for the volume, it weighed 59.67 pounds. And when you haul and bring your grain in, they don't measure the volume, they measure the weight of the grain. So therefore, I am actually hauling less volume to get those bushels. With that, we then figure out what the storage of the tub of the grain bin is. So this tub was 18,506 peaked bushels. You have to subtract the floor. As you guys can see in the video, there's a floor in there that is allows us to blow air through the grain, and then also have the unload. The floor is going to subtract 570 bushels from the 18,506 bushels of storage, meaning that truly we could hold 17,936 bushels in this grain bin. Now, I also need to convert the grain from the average moisture of 13.2% to 15% so that it's standard across the way, because moisture actually weighs something. Which could affect the test weight a little bit. I'm not quite sure how that correlation works, but basically what we're looking at is we're going to put it at 15%, which means that we add 383.93 bushels back to my total to bring it up to an average of 15%, giving us 18,646.78 bushels worth of grain that we kind of hauled, or weight that we hauled. If we take the 18,646.78 minus what the bin could hold, which means the tub minus the floor, means that we actually held an extra 711 bushels of corn this year in the grain bin. That's how my brain works around the test weight. How does your guys' brain work? What does your math look like when you figure out how many more bushels are in a bin when it comes to test weight?